Hello, everyone, and welcome. In this episode, we are going to discuss how to share files and folders between Linux and Windows. And to be honest, I was not even planning on creating this video, but I had a question from one of my viewers who asked, I switch between Linux and Windows constantly and want to share files and folders without copying stuff back and forth. Any advice? So in this episode, I'm going to talk about how I do it. This is probably not the only way, but the way that it works for me. And the way that we are going to do it is to use what is called SMB, or Server Message Block Protocol. It is basically a client-server protocol that governs access to files, directories, as well as other network resources such as printers. So this has been part of Windows forever. So, if you're if you're a Windows user, you're actually using SMB already, and you may not be aware of it. So when you create a share on your desktop, and then you access it from other places, then you're using SMB. So behind the scenes, it uses SMB. If you access a printer from your Windows, that is also used as SMB. So in order to make that happen on Linux, there is something called Samba, which is an open source project that enables the use of Server Message Block, or SMB, in Linux and the Unix distributions, thereby allowing cross-platform communication via SMB. And specifically, the dialect that we're going to use, the version of SMB that we're going to use as a client on Linux, is called CIF, or Common Internet File System, and is a communication protocol. Again, is based on SMB, and again provides sharing resources between Linux and Windows. So before showing the process of creating a share on Windows and make that available on Linux, let's go ahead and let me show you how kind of a finished product and how I use this method for creating videos for my channel. So over here, I have created a folder called YouTube channel, and then I have various videos under this, and it's actually on OneDrive, so it's being saved on OneDrive in case my computer crashes. So I've made that available to Linux. So if you go to Linux here, and if I do an ls, so this is basically on this folder I've mounted the content of this channel here. So if I do an ls, you'll see exact same files here, because it's really pointing to this files here. If I create, say, a text file, you'll see that it shows up here. So that is basically the coordination between these two. Is if I create something here, it shows up here. If I delete this here and I do an ls, you'll see that it's gone from here. So this is how we're going to implement the first part of this presentation, which is making a share available from Windows to Linux. I've created a folder called WinShare, and we are going to create a share out of this and make that available to Linux. But before that, we need to check a couple of things. First of all, you want to make sure that network browsing and discovery is enabled. And to do that, go to Control Panel and click on Network and Internet, and then click on Network and Sharing Center, and finally click on Change Advanced Sharing and Settings, and make sure Network Discovery over here is turned on. And this is explanation. When the Network Discovery is on, this computer can see other network computers and devices, and is also visible to other network computers. So make sure this is turned on. By default is on, just double check that. And then the next thing that you want to do is you want to create a user that owns in this folder, and you don't want to make that as part of the administrators, because we will need to make the credentials of this user available on Linux. I'll show you next, but create a user that has limited access to this computer. And if you don't know how to create a user on Windows, just type computer management, and when it comes up, click on local users and groups, and on users, then you can create your users, create a new user, and then you go from there. I already created a user called user1 that I'm going to use for this. So right click on this, create properties, sharing, advanced sharing, and share this folder. And on permissions, by default, everyone has read access. You can disable that if you want, and only add the user that you want to give access to. So in this case, it's user1. Check name to make sure it's correct. Yes, correct. So I'm going to give it full access to that user. So that's done as on the Windows side. So it's pretty simple on Windows. Now let's go ahead on Linux and see what we need to do. So on line 5, the first thing that you need to do is make sure that your Linux, as always, is up to date. So before running the next command, make sure your computer is up to date. And then we installed a utility called CIFS-utilities. So if you call CIF is a subset of SMB, the protocol that is used for sharing between computers. So, and then you install that as sudo apt-get install, and then the name of utilities. So this is obviously for on Ubuntu. If you're using different distros, just use the appropriate package manager to install. So I've already installed that. I'm not going to run that. Then you need to create a folder or a directory on Linux where the shared information or shared folders or files can be loaded in on that directory. And then on line 9, I already created that, so I'm not going to create that. And then on line 10, we can then finally load the stuff that we created on Windows. We can then mount it into Linux folder. And this is the command, sudo mount -t CIFS. So this is CIFS. Basically, the file type that will be loading will be CIFS type. And then this part is the Windows information, the server, -- the IP address, and then the share name that we just created, and where we're going to mount it on. This is a directory that will be mounted on. We've just created over here. And then what user? So this is the user on Windows. So and then what? Which credential are you going to use to mount this folder? And then next part, -o UID equal to Gary. So this is needed. If you don't do this, Linux will mount that share into this folder. However, it will be mounted as the root. So in order to create anything and remove anything, you also have to use sudo, like sudo make directory or sudo remove file or whatever. So that becomes tiresome. So if we can change that, and you can actually make yourself to be the owner. So once the directory is mounted, the share is mounted into that directory, then it will be as you. So you don't have to, when you modify the folder and files, you don't have to specify sudo. So let's go ahead and run that. And first of all, I need to provide my password. Now, this is where this prompt is coming now. Says, what is the password for this user. So I need to provide the password for the user, and now this is done. So if I do, so in line 12, let's go ahead and create a file called test.txt. So touch, and then the location, this is where we mounted the share. Let's go ahead and create that. And then if we go back to Windows now, and inside this, we'll see that it's created. So now we'll see that it's working properly. If you want to unmount, if you don't need it anymore, then on line 14, sudo umount and the name of the directory that you mounted stuff on. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that is unmounted. So one issue with mounting a share like this that we did in line 10 through command line is if we reboot the server, then that mount automatically is unmounted. So if you're looking for a way to make that more persistent, we need to do a little bit more work. And the first thing that we need to create is credential files, because the user up here, as we saw, we need to provide a password for it. So if the system needs to load that automatically when it starts up, then we need to provide a file that contains the user ID and password. So we can create a very simple files like this, which has the user ID, the username, and the password of the user that owns that share that we are loading. And what we need to do is first we need to create a folder, and by default, it should go under etc samba. It doesn't have to, but this is the convention. So if that folder doesn't exist, we need to create that. So if you create a samba, which is the SMB sharing mechanism on the server, then it automatically will create it. Otherwise, we need to create that. And then we create a file. We can name it whatever we want. I named it WinScreen, WinCred, Windows Cred -user1.cred. And then we add, like I showed you, we just add username and password to it and just create that. So pretty simple. And then on line 27, it's a good idea to lock that file down. So sudo change mode 400 and our credential file. Basically what it does is it gives read-only access to the root and no access to anybody else. So if somebody else is logged on into that server, won't be able to look at that file. Okay, next thing that we need to do is we need to actually tell the system that it needs to mount that share every time that Linux starts. So that's on line 29. We need to modify this file here. It's called fstab, which is under etc. And fstab stands for file system table. Basically, this is a table that tells Linux what needs to be loaded when the system starts. And then we need to add a line here, which I provided as a sample. So let's go ahead inside that file and then take a look at it. I need to put in my password. If you scroll down, I already added that line. Let's uncomment that. Let's go together and see what it is. So this is basically the first part is the device that we are mounting, the share that we are mounting. So that is the, again, IP address of the server and the share name of the Windows. And then the second part, this is where we want to load it or mount it on. And again, that would be under home directory and under MNT Windows, the one that I showed you earlier. And this part is the file type. And again, this is a CIFS, so that is identifies, if it's like we are loading NTFS, then we specify NTFS. So this particular example, we're doing CIFS, so that's what we specify. And then there's a bunch of them, whatever options that you need to specify. Let's go through that together. So UID is equal to Gary, and GID is equal to Gary. So basically, the user ID and the group that the system will use to mount the share. Again, if we don't specify this, it will be loaded as root. And then if we want to modify the content of the mounted folder, then we need to use sudo. So in order to avoid that, then we just specify a user, so in this case, myself and the group that I'm in. And then the next part is the credentials. So where should it read the credentials from? And that's the file we just created up here. And then there are a couple of flags here. The first flag basically is, should this be backed? This is very old, so the answer is no. So 0 means no. And the next one is, should it do any sort of file check when it's loaded? And again, the answer is no. So let's go ahead and save this. And then on line 54, sudo mount -a. So basically what it does is mount everything that is in that folder. If it's not already loaded, it will load. So let's go ahead and run that. And that's done. Now there are sometimes, I added some documentation here in case you run into this. The first time that you load this, if you make it, it will load no problem. But if you load that and you later on decide to make a change to fstab and that section here, for instance, we want to remove the UID and JIT, for instance, for whatever reason, you need to unload the mount and then add your changes and then mount again. So and run this command, sudo mount a. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, you can reboot. So always reboot will resolve that issue. Okay, so now let's go ahead and then bring back the file here. So there's already a file over there. So let's go ahead and create a new one. Let's change that to test2. Let's go ahead and create a new file on line 41, touch, and that's text2. Let's go ahead and run that, and then we go back here, and we'll see now we have test2. So we'll see that now established. Okay, we can verify on line 46, mount -l and grep. So basically, we want to see what's loaded. So in that fstab file, we want to see what's loaded. We can do that with sudo mount -l, and then we pass in MNT window. So we're only interested in the load in the folder or the share that we loaded. So if we run that for line 46, and we will see that this is what's loaded. Again, the same share name. And then CIFs and the rest of the information. In this section, we are going to create a share on a Linux VM, and we're going to expose that to both Windows and Linux clients. So I've logged into a different VM, and I'm going to install Samba, so that is on line 76. Sudo apt get install Samba. If you recall, Samba is the SMB server on Linux. So that implements SMB file sharing server on Linux. So when you run that on 76, that will install Samba. So I've already installed that. And then you create a folder where you want to share it out. And then on line 81, we need to modify the SMB config file and add the share information that we are creating. So let's go ahead and open that file. And if we scroll down, you add this section here. So you need to name the share, whatever you want to call it. I call it SMB share 1. And then below that, you can put whatever comment that you want. The path on this machine that you're sharing out, and the valid user that you want to be owner of this, and then writable. Do you want this to be writable, browsable? If people can browse it, and is this going to be read only? Yes or no. In this case, no. So basically, what you're saying is this share that you're creating, this user has access to do all of this: read, write, and browse. So let's get out of that. And then when you do that, it automatically, Linux will make that share available from outside the environment. So a couple of steps that we need to take. First of all, because we specify a user here called user1, we need first to create that user in Linux. So that's the command sudo add user, and then the name of the user, and then it prompts you with creating a password for that user and complete that. And then once that, then on line 94, you need to add SMB, you need to ask SMB to add that user to be able to manage the share. So that on line 94, sudo SMB pass WD -A and the user that you want to add. So once you do that, then that user will be added to Samba. And then we can then go to a client, a Linux client, then we can try this out. And I have a different machine now. I've switched to a different machine. So this will act as the client to the server that we just created the share on. So on line 98, this is exactly the same command that we use to load a Windows share. This is very, very similar to that. Same different location, this different server, and SMB share 1. And then this is the location that we are loading onto. And then the user that will be passing the credential for, and then UID, again, under what authority or what user will be owning once that folder is or that share is loaded, and that would be me. So let's go ahead and run that, and then that prompts us with the password for that user. And now that's loaded. And then if we want, again, we can then unmount it on line 100. So we go ahead and do that. And then we can also add that user, if you want to, that Linux will permanently load that whenever it's loaded. Then you can create a cred file for it, and then go through the FS tab and add exactly the same step that we took earlier. And then from Windows, we need to run this. So net use, and then the name of the directory that we want to be loaded to, and the location. So let's go ahead and just copy in that, and then let's go to PowerShell window, and then let's go ahead and run that. So net use, and so the directory name would be that it's loading into, or will be sharing, loading the share into would be M, and that is the server name and the name of the share. So let's go and run that. So it asks us for the user. So that would be user1 on Linux, and the password for that user. And we'll see that completed successfully. Now if we go to File Manager here, and then go to this PC, and then look at the share here, we'll see that this is loaded under M. And then we can also say from here M, and then then we can do whatever, create files, add files, and then once we do that, those changes will be available in Linux as well. So this was a quick a discussion on how we can share files between Linux and Windows. Again, this wasn't planned. I just had somebody ask me to do this, so hopefully this will help somebody else out there if they need to share files and folders between Linux and Windows. Thank you.